What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Thursday, January 9th, 2025. I believe this is the first podcast of the new year, if not just, actually, I think I did have a pod earlier on this year, but thanks so much for being here. Glad to have you along for another episode. I'm coming to you from San Antonio, Texas. Looks like a different background. That's because I'm out here in the Lone Star State covering the Navy All-American Bowl. We've got a lot of great coverage for our readers over at ScoopDuck.com. Ducks are well represented here with a number of 2025 signees and some 2026 recruiting targets. Talk about guys like Dorian Brew, Trey McNutt, Toby Hastrup, McKay Madsen, a 2025 linebacker that the Ducks are recruiting out of California. All those guys and more are out here competing against the nation's very best. So it's been a great week so far out here. If you guys aren't already, make sure to check us out at scoopduck.com. Believe you can try us out for just $1, and that gets you access to the rest of the On3 network and all of the other fan sites as well. But we have a lot to get into here on today's episode. I am watching the Notre Dame Penn State game here. I have it on in the hotel on the TV. So if you catch me glancing a little bit, it's halftime right now, so probably not too much of that. But Penn State's up 10-0 right now. Or 10-3 at the half. So it looks like it's a close one out there in Miami. If you're watching us here on the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel, thanks so much for being here. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. So a lot has happened since we last recorded, and apologies for not getting an episode out to you guys sooner. Things have been really busy out here in San Antonio, and Justin and I haven't really been able to sync up. So that's why you see me here solo on another episode, because I didn't want to wait too long. Kind of felt like I did on that last one, but here we are. So starting off with our first big story, 5-star quarterback Jaron Keawe-Sagapolutele, the Oregon signee and early enrollee in the 2025 class, has transferred, and he transferred back to Cal in one of the most surprising developments in this 2025 recruiting cycle for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. This comes, of course, after he signed with the Ducks early last month, enrolled early with a lot of other members of this 2025 recruiting class, went through a handful of practices with the Ducks, was with the Ducks in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl, and then now he is in Berkeley, and what do you know? He is a California Bear. So let's rewind this a little bit and just kind of unpack this news and what it means for Oregon. So I'll tell you this. I remember when I went to bed on December 3rd, 2024, the night before the start of the early signing period, right? Signing day eve, if you will. I wasn't feeling super confident that JKS, we'll shorten him JKS for this episode. I wasn't sure, and I wasn't really that confident that JKS was going to become a Duck. He started the day, committed to Cal, and ended the day, committed to Oregon. Didn't even tell the Oregon staff. Like that's just how close this thing was. So that was, I think, the biggest shocker of the day, of the early signing period for Oregon. Naeem Offord, flipping him from Ohio State, was big, but I predicted that one, so I wasn't super surprised when it happened. Giving myself a little pat on the back there. But seriously, I wasn't expecting JKS to be a Duck. And he was one of 2 quarterbacks that Will Stein signed in the 2025 class. 3, I guess, because I can't forget about Mark Weipert out of the state of Oregon. But the other scholarship quarterback that the Ducks signed was Achilles Smith Jr., the Oregon legacy out of San Diego, California, Lincoln High School. He is with the Ducks in Eugene, rocking and rolling in the winter workouts. But here we are. JKS decides to transfer, and it was a pretty big shock. And I made a couple calls, obviously, since this news came out. And basically what I was able to learn is that Oregon was pretty blindsided by this move. And I mean, can you blame them? He just got there. I don't want to speak ill or criticize his move. He has to do what's best for himself, but that was a wild development. I mean, I want to say I might have seen a quote. I think I saw a quote out there talking about how he didn't feel like a priority at Oregon in the short span of time that he was there. It might have been with 247. I can't remember which publication it was with, but I do remember seeing that quote out there. So that one was just a head scratcher for me because he had just gotten to Oregon and the Ducks were in the thick of a playoff run. I'm not sure what you expect if you are an early enrollee in that situation. And I saw him at the Rose Bowl, so that made it even more jarring when he went to decide and do this. But it's bizarre. It's 2025, and we're in the NIL and transfer portal era of college football and recruiting. So as crazy as it sounds, you can't rule anything out. So it was a wild ride for the Ducks in this recruitment. But now let's get into what this means. At the end of the day, sure, you're losing a 5-star quarterback. You're losing the number 1 recruit from Hawaii in the 2025 class. But I think Oregon's going to be okay. Obviously, he really wanted to play as a true freshman in some capacity, maybe even start. I know that was a big storyline the whole time in his recruitment. I think that if you're just kind of reading between the lines here, he got to Oregon and saw those guys throw in that quarterback room, saw with his own eyes in those practices what Oregon has waiting in the wings behind Dillon Gabriel. You look at Dante Moore, you look at Austin Novosad. Those guys are good, and they've been in college for a while. So I think he probably saw that and decided that he'd have a better chance of seeing the field at Cal, and that there's nothing wrong with that. That's just what he wants to do. So now for Oregon, they have a really good quarterback room still. We are out of the first transfer portal period, and no quarterbacks have entered the portal in addition to JKS. So Oregon's quarterback room as it stands right now is fully intact as we kind of look ahead to spring football. And it looks like the Ducks will probably have a competition between Dante Moore and Austin Novosad, with the widely spread assumption or school of thought that Dante Moore is the front runner for this job. And I think that's what most people think, right? When he transferred from UCLA to Oregon at the same time, no less, than Dillon Gabriel did, that was the foundation. That was kind of the expectation, was that he was going to come in, sit for a year behind Dillon Gabriel, learn from him, and then hit the ground running in 2025 and compete for that starting job. So Oregon's quarterback room is still in a really good spot. And behind him, behind those two guys, I should say, you have Luke Moga, who the Ducks signed the 2024 class, and then Achilles Smith Jr., also commonly goes by KJ, and Mark Weipert, as well as Brock Thomas. So if you're Will Stein, I think you're happy about this quarterback room and where things stand as you look ahead to the 2025 season. So don't want to spend too much time on that one. Already almost up to 9 minutes here on the podcast, so apologies if I rambled a little bit there. Let's look to some of the good news that Oregon fans are going to be excited about. The Ducks strike in the transfer portal, and they do so in a big way. Let's start things off talking about former Florida State wide receiver Malik Benson. Malik Benson announced his commitment to Oregon over the likes of Kansas State and Tennessee following a visit out to Eugene over the weekend. I think both he and Makai Hughes, don't want to get ahead of myself here, but both he and Makai Hughes are just another example of how well this Oregon staff does with transfer portal visitors. Most of the time, if a transfer portal guy comes out to Eugene for a visit, that they end up on that Oregon roster the following year. So we know with Trayshawn Holden and Tez Johnson moving on and exhausting their college eligibility, the Ducks are going to need, they were going to need some help at wide receiver next year. And getting a guy like Malik Benson, I think is a smart move. Obviously, a lot of people after this decision came out even before he committed to Oregon, right? A lot of people were looking at Oregon pursuing Malik Benson in the transfer portal, also a guy that played at Alabama in Nick Saban's last season. And they were saying, why are the Ducks going after this guy? He hasn't exactly produced those kind of numbers that pop off the page. He's not ripping off sick highlights every week. But I did a little bit of digging, and I spoke with one of our On3 writers for Florida State, the Florida State site, I should say, War Chant. I talked to Ira Schofel. I hope I'm saying that right. It might be Schofel. I'll go with Schofel. Ira Schofel, who writes for War Chant, and I wanted to get his perspective, right? Pick his brain a little bit. Say, hey, I'm seeing all this stuff out there about Malik Benson. A lot of that was obviously what Oregon fans thought, and then getting my own thoughts as well, kind of evaluating the situation. What are your thoughts, Ira? And one of the big ones that really stuck out to me from what Ira had to say was that he thinks that Malik Benson has a lot more potential than what he was able to show at Florida State. And what do we know about Florida State? Rough year in 2024 for Mike Norvell and the Seminoles. Tons of dysfunction. They just had a terrible season. So I think that about lines up with what Ira was saying. So if you're Malik Benson, you're a guy who has one more year of eligibility left, right? After that Diego Pavia situation that grants former JUCO players who were going to exhaust their eligibility after this year, one more year of eligibility. And I think kind of consequently with that, 4 total years of Division I eligibility, right? I think this is a good situation for Oregon and Malik Benson. Oregon loses experience, and they bring in some good experience with Malik Benson. Oregon loses some speed. You bring in a deep threat in Malik Benson, a 6'1", 195-pound receiver originally from the state of Kansas. And I don't think that Malik Benson is necessarily this super flashy, game-breaking wide receiver, a guy who's going to take a screen and just rip off huge gains. But he is a guy that is known for his speed and his ability to stretch the field vertically. So now for Oregon, if you're looking at this wide receiver room, looking at next season, Evan Stewart, big news out of Eugene this week. He's going to be foregoing the NFL draft and choosing to stay in Eugene to play one more season of college football. And that's great if you're a Duck fan, right? Because he was injured, unable to go in the Rose Bowl. So that would have been a tough way to end your college career. But now Evan Stewart's back. He's a deep threat. You lose Tez Johnson, and I'm not saying Malik Benson is Tez Johnson, but now you have another deep threat on your team. So getting into the wide receiver room a little bit, you feel pretty solid about where things are at there. You have Justice Lowe, who comes back after playing a good amount this year when Tez Johnson was hurt. You have DeCorian Moore, the 5-star true freshman, 5-star plus, I should say, number 1 wide receiver in America out of Duncanville, Texas. He's going to be at Oregon. And then you have Jurion Dickey, Kyler Casper, a couple other names that we've really been waiting to see kind of break through and carve out a role in this rotation in Junior Adams' wide receiver room. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Malik Benson edition. I think I understand where all the questions are coming from with the Oregon fans, but it seems like it's a low risk, high reward move. He's looking to have one more strong season. Remember, everyone, this is a guy who was a former number 1 junior college recruit. That wasn't a fluke. I don't think it was a fluke, but you can make the argument, hey, we're waiting to see why that was in his college career. So I think this is a much better situation for him at Oregon. He's going to have a great quarterback and Dante Moore. The offensive line is going to be looking a little bit different. So those are some of the question marks that we're going to see to start the year. But if what we saw this past season, when the Ducks were moving some pieces around on the offensive line and had a little bit of a rough start out the gate, if this season tells us anything, it's that Will Stein and his group, his side of the ball, are going to get things rolling. So overall, I like the Malik Benson edition. I'm going to be curious to see if Oregon looks for another wide receiver in the transfer portal. I think it just depends on who hops in. I had heard some buzz. I was having some of my sources telling me that Oregon was looking good for Zachariah Branch, the former USC wide receiver who has since transferred to Georgia alongside his older brother, Zion Branch. Just to kind of add a little bit more here, I think that the Oregon angle, the Oregon buzz really died down when it came out that both of the brothers were in the transfer portal and they wanted to be a package deal at their next stop. So now we'll see what other options maybe pop up for Oregon, and if they feel like they want to go explore those options as far as adding another wide receiver. The Ducks got another transfer portal commitment that we're going to talk about, and it's a name that we've heard about for a while now. Former Tulane running back Makai Hughes announced his commitment to Oregon alongside Benson after he also visited Oregon this past weekend. And Tulane, not a whole lot of Oregon connection there. You got former Oregon quarterback Ty Thompson out there in New Orleans now with the Tulane Green Wave. Big development on his career. He's going to be moving to tight end. He removed his name from the transfer portal after playing in their bowl game as their quarterback, and he's going to be moving to tight end. But Makai Hughes, probably far and away viewed as the best offensive player on that Tulane team. He enters the transfer portal after 3 years in New Orleans, and he was On3's number one running back in the transfer portal. So we'll get into why this addition is great, but I think that even with Jordan James declaring for the NFL draft, we have to see what happens with Noah Whittington here. Unless something breaks here as I'm recording, hopefully that doesn't happen. But for the running back room in Eugene, when Jordan James declared for the NFL draft, you were probably hoping that he comes back. One more year with the Ducks, one last ride, right? But I think running back, rather, is a position for Oregon where you're not going to be worried. You're not going to be worried about, are the Ducks going to be able to attract top talent to be running back, which maybe that comes off a little bit arrogant, but look at what Oregon's been able to do and some of the running backs that they've had over the years. LaMichael James, Kenyon Barner, DeAnthony Thomas, Royce Freeman, Bucky Irving, who's tearing it up in the NFL right now. You think it's hard to find some dudes out there? Hey, you want to come play running back at Oregon? I don't think a lot of guys are going to say no. But all that to say, I think Makai Hughes is an awesome, awesome addition for the Ducks. Redshirt sophomore, 3 years at the college level, 5'11", 210 pounds. He had to sit out his true freshman season in 2022 because of an injury, but when that guy got on the field again, fully healthy, he was tearing it up like Bucky Irving was tearing it up in the NFL, right? So he's played 28 games in his college career so far, 523 carries for just under 2,800 yards and 22 touchdowns. Dude averaged 5.3 yards per carry in both the 2023 and the 2024 season. We know that Oregon's running backs, they like to use them in the passing game a lot. I think that was one of the areas where I would have liked to see the Ducks utilize Jordan James a bit more, was in the passing game, but I don't really think he was a receiving back. So for Makai Hughes, he's caught 30 passes for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns in his 2 years. And this is a guy who has breakaway speed, and he's going to be hitting some home runs for the Ducks come 2025, come next season. And then the cool story, seems like it was really overplayed, but it was really kind of the beginning of the Oregon connection. This is Naeem Offord's older brother. Like I said, from Birmingham, like Naeem Offord is. He went to Huffman High School. And I think getting more guys from the South, it's not the most important thing, but I think it's always a good thing for the most part, right? And I know as someone who covers recruiting that Oregon wants to push further and further into the Southeast, right? You don't need me to tell you that. But even though they do strike out time to time, maybe more often than not, on some of these top guys in the Southeast when they're coming out of high school, the transfer portal is kind of that golden opportunity to try again. And I think that Oregon's probably had better odds in the transfer portal. You look at a guy like Jordan Birch. Oregon doesn't usually get a top defensive lineman from the South out of high school, but they did here. They did get a top guy from the South in Makai Hughes. So going to be exciting to see how he does under Rashad Samples. Does kind of feel like it's going to be a little bit of a fresher look in the Oregon backfield. We have to see what happens with Noah Whittington. You have to imagine now that Jordan James is heading to the NFL that the Ducks are going to try to push to get Whittington back in Eugene for one more year. If you're asking yourself, no, Whittington has another year, it's because you got a medical hardship or medical red shirt in 2023 after he suffered a season-ending injury against Colorado. That said, I do feel like the running back room, aside from Whittington, is a little bit of a mystery right now, because you look at guys behind that. You have Jay Harris, who you brought in from Northwest Missouri State. He scored a touchdown against Purdue, but aside from that, we didn't really hear from the guy. So where is he at in his development? Is he going to be ready to go in 2025? Is he going to take a drastic step forward? Or how about true freshman will be a true sophomore, I think, maybe a redshirt freshman. I have to look at the numbers there. Dejon Dink Riggs from the DC area, DMV. You know, I'm all about that DMV pipeline. He looked good. He looked pretty good in the limited reps that he saw as a true freshman, and I know fans were excited about him. So how does he look? Is he going to be a guy who can be a legitimate number 2, or maybe he takes on like a Jordan James type of role when he was early in his Oregon career as kind of a more of a 2A or number 3 back? And what about Jayden Lamar? Is he a guy that you're confident in being a consistent piece of that running back rotation? So lots of questions here. You have Jordan Davison, you have De'Ara Hill Jr. Those guys are 2 guys that joined Oregon in the 2025 season from the high school ranks from modern day. Obviously, I know all about Jordan Davison after getting to cover him a whole heck of a lot during his high school career. And then Hill comes all the way from Illinois, and that's a dude, really versatile talent, state champion. If you haven't seen it yet, do yourself a favor and go look up De'Ara Hill state championship highlights, because that dude was a human highlight reel, if I've ever seen one. So quick update on the Orange Bowl. Second half's underway. Penn State is still up 10-3. This game will probably be over by the time I upload this. That Penn State defensive front is nasty, and Notre Dame's offense has been struggling so far. But back to this. Oregon's doing a great job in the portal. They're at 8 transfer portal commitments now. One of the better classes in the transfer portal nationally. And I think one of the bigger picture items that we can kind of dig into a little bit here as we wind down on this episode of the pod, Dan Lanning's stacking. He's stacking elite recruiting classes out there in Eugene. And what comes with that, you hope it's 2 things, right? If you're an Oregon fan, you're hoping, one, speaking about a guy like Corey Moore, you hope it means more guys seeing the field prominently right away. Not because, hey, this is all we got. Like, I like this example. I use it all the time. When Thomas Graham played at Oregon, ended up being a great DB at Oregon, he played as a true freshman. Was he out there because he was head and shoulders better than every other corner that the Ducks had on their roster? No. If you remember, the Ducks were kind of in disarray when he was a true freshman in 2017, and they had to throw him out there. They're like, you're what we got, man. Figure it out. Do the best you can. But they're at a point now, the Ducks are, where they're bringing in true freshmen that are so highly rated, so highly touted, so highly coveted. You're bringing in true freshmen that you want to take jobs from your vets, or at least push them for snaps. And I think that's where this Oregon program is headed, with class after class after class being stacked. Dan Lanning's had 3 full recruiting classes since he's come in at Oregon. They all rank inside the top 10. The last 2 rank inside the top 5. That means something. And then with that, you hope to see less and less of a reliance on the transfer portal. I've been saying that the Ducks have been going pretty hard at safety in the transfer portal. Hopefully they can get away from that with guys like Aaron Flowers, Kingston Lopa, taking a little bit of a leap in 2025, right? Remains to be seen. But Ducks really pushed in the transfer portal last offseason. It looks right now like they probably won't be pushing quite as hard, but hey, I could be wrong. The roster limit is getting bumped up to 105, so maybe I'm seeing a different tune in a couple months here. But Oregon's in a really good spot. You got to give props to Dan Lanning and Marshall Malco and the rest of that Oregon staff, recruiting staff, personnel staff, the assistant coaches. They're out on the road all over the place. Alik Terry was in Florida earlier today. Chris Hampton's out here in Texas. He was checking in on a recruit in Houston, so not in my area, but the Ducks are on the road, and recruiting definitely is a priority for them. So exciting times. Hope to get more consistent with the pod now that we're in the new year. I'll get back to Long Beach this weekend, and then hopefully we can get a little bit more regular with these pods, because I love doing these. I love interacting with you guys, and it's just a fun way to tell the story of Oregon football and recruiting. So got a couple favors to ask of you guys. Wherever you're tuned in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow the Ducks Dish podcast. Follow me on any social media platform at Torres Sports, and check us out at ScoopDuck.com. You can try us out for just $1. I'm out here in San Antonio getting a bunch of interviews, getting some scoop for our readers over at ScoopDuck.com. So no better place to be for Oregon recruiting. And I think that's a promise. So go check us out over there, and share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans. But until next time, I appreciate you guys tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.